Hey students, welcome to another video Astronomy 101. I'm really sorry it's video in this section because of course we're talking about what probably most people think is the best part of the book, including me to some extent, space aliens. How can you beat space aliens for a topic? Nonetheless, we have to make do with what we have, and so I'm going to try to talk through. There's a lot of people had a lot of different questions. A lot of them did focus on a few areas, so I think I can hit a large number of people's questions by covering a few things because there was just a lot of overlap. But first things first, someone asked, a number of people commented on, gee, I was really surprised to find out that people were thinking about space aliens and talking about space aliens well back into the past. And so someone asked specifically, and other people asked similar questions, what did people think back then think space aliens looked like? And I have only been able to find illustrations going back about 200 years. So about 200 years ago, there was a big newspaper article that claimed that John Herschel, who was William Herschel's son and Carolyn Herschel's nephew, who became a famous astronomer, had built a super telescope down in South Africa, and that he had, with this super telescope, had been able to see a civilization on the moon. And so we got, and there were pictures or descriptions made of these supposed lunar aliens. And so here's what we got. There were, according to this article, this supposed true story, this is major fake news, okay, completely made up. But there were two different types of beings that lived on the moon, and they are both shown in this picture, which I'll bring up here. Okay, and so you had things that kind of looked like people with bat wings, and creatures that kind of looked like beavers. All right, and so here's a couple of other illustrations. So there's your bat-winged people. As you can see, they fly around. They don't wear any clothes, but they fly. Okay. And that's supposed to be like a view through his telescope, like you're looking through the telescope, and there they are. There's a crater on the moon, and somehow he was seeing this. Of course, no telescope, not even the best telescope today, has the ability to see that kind of detail on the moon anyway. But nonetheless, here is a more detailed illustration of one of the moon aliens, the flying kind. All right. And then here's a close-up showing the little hut-dwelling beaver people or teddy bear people. In my opinion, this certainly is where the idea of Ewoks comes from in the Star Wars movies. So those are some old, ballpark figure 200-year-old ideas about what creatures on another world would look like. Pause it for a moment, get to another question here. Okay, so a number of questions that people asked revolved around Aristotle and geocentrism versus heliocentrism, and then back to ideas about the four elements and the fifth element that were part of Aristotle's idea versus our modern idea now, where we just believe there's matter in the universe and there's not the difference between earthly things and celestial things. Okay, so this is a specific question like, why did Aristotle say there's no room did he not allow for other worlds? Okay, and well, because where would you have another world in the Aristotelian universe? So in the Aristotelian universe, you have the Earth at the center, and then here's like the moon going around the Earth, and the sun going around the Earth, and the planet in an epicycle around the sun, and you got the stars out here. But all of this stuff, okay, this is made of your earth, your air, your fire, and your water, okay? And all the rest of this is fifth element, all the stuff in red. So there's nothing in common between the Earth and a planet, right? So there's no thing in the universe like Earth in the geocentric universe because it's the only thing made out of earthly elements, earth, air, fire, and water. Okay, everything else is the fifth element. So, these places have nothing to do, nothing in common with Earth. So why would you ever think we could live out there or creatures like us could live out there? Now, you might believe in angels or something, who could live out in these worlds, but not corporeal beings like us, right? What we would call space aliens, right? When we're talking about space aliens, we're not talking about ghosts or angels or things like that, right? We're talking about biological creatures. That's the idea behind life on other worlds, is creatures like intelligent life on other worlds. Creatures like us that live on planets or places other than Earth, okay? Or worlds other than Earth. I don't know how much I want to try to pin that phrase down. Now, so what's the difference when you go to heliocentrism? Heliocentrism changes everything. Because when you go to heliocentrism, you go from the Earth being a unique object, all right, the only one of its kind in the whole universe, to, why does it have to be the only one of its kind in the whole universe? Because in geocentrism, the reason this material is here, the earth, the air, the fire, and the water, the reason it's there is because that's the center of the universe. That's the bottom or the lowest place, and that's where the heavy things go, okay? Because they naturally pool down into the bottom of the drain, so to speak. If there were any other earth, air, fire, or water scattered around in the universe, they would all naturally tend to go that direction too. This is what Aristotle had. There's that quote where he says that the motions of the elements would become mixed up. And so if you put a world like Earth here, well, it was going to go that way because that's the center of the universe, and that's where earth, air, and water go to. Heliocentrism is completely different because in heliocentrism, you're saying here's the sun, and the Earth goes around the sun. Well, there's the Earth, a planet like, say, Mars. It goes around the sun too. So you immediately have, whereas in this picture, there's nothing like the Earth. In this picture, there's immediately something like the Earth, okay? Namely, the planets. And so you immediately have a possibility of planets being homes for other life, like Earth has. After all, why should Earth be the only thing that has life on it, okay? If Earth's going around the sun, and a planet's going around the sun, they have things in common. Why would you expect that the planet wouldn't have all the things in common that the Earth does? Especially after you observe a planet through a telescope and you see that it's round and it rotates and maybe it's got a moon going around it like Jupiter does, or so on and so forth. You say, well, Earth has these things, the planet has these things, they have stuff in common. Why would Earth be the only thing in the universe that has life? And so therefore, the planet's going to have life. So you very quickly, when you bring about heliocentrism, you very quickly get the idea that there are going to be life on other planets, right? Now, that of course gets extended to life on the moon. Okay, well, why would, if Earth is round, Earth, you learn more about our modern view of the universe. We understand that why is the Earth and the planet both going around the sun? Is because they both have momentum. They both are self-gravitating, so they hold things onto their surfaces. They can have atmospheres and moons and things like that. Okay, so then you think, well, wait a minute. The moon is made out of matter and has gravity and it's round. Why wouldn't the moon have life on it? Well, the sun is made out of matter and has gravity and it's round. Why wouldn't the sun have life on it? Why wouldn't any of these places have life on them? And so that's where you get to the ideas like William Herschel, who is saying that the sun could be the abode of life. In other words, he actually thinks that based on astronomical principles, that the sun would have life on it. It just stands to reason. Now, it's very interesting because a lot of people commented and said stuff like, boy, it sure is dumb to think that there's life on the sun. Okay, or on the moon, or on Mars. Okay, well, why do you think that? Okay, go back to forget everything you know. Remember? Okay, why would you think it's stupid to have life on the sun? Well, it's hot in the sun. Well, if you go out into the desert on Earth, it's hot, and you look up at the top of a mountain, and you see snow up there. Okay, so we can see here on Earth that you can be in the desert, and you can look up, 14,000 feet, and it's icy up there. So why couldn't you have a world where it was hot up above and then reasonable temperature down below? Why not? Okay. Same thing with the other worlds. So people assumed once they began realizing the idea that other places had things in common with Earth, that every place had things in common with Earth. So a lot of y'all made comments saying, well, it's kind of dumb for people to think this. Somebody said, were there any actual theories about space aliens that were believable? Yeah, they all were. Okay, is not the idea of beings on the sun believable? All you just have to do is to apply the same ideas that you see on Earth, that you can have a difference in temperature between a high place and a low place. You just decide the high place is going to be hotter, and the low place will be the cooler place. And you can have you can imagine a habitable surface with beings on it. We say, well, then why is the atmosphere of the sun glowing there? Well, do you know that the atmosphere of the Earth glows? Okay, they're called the northern lights. So we know that Earth's atmosphere can glow. So you just take that idea to the sun and you make it more intense and more powerful, but it's still a plausible idea. On the other hand, there were students who said, now wait a minute, why would someone like Alfred Russel Wallace, for example, criticize the idea that you could have life on other planets? Okay, because Wallace is the person who comes along and does calculations, says, no, Mercury's too hot, Venus is going to be too hot. The outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, they're just big gas balls. They're going to be cold, so they're not going to have surfaces. Mars is going to be too cold and too small, and so on and so forth. And so a couple of people said things to the extent of, well, how do you know that, right? And that's a good question. Okay, how do we know that you can't have a creature that, even given the sun being what we now know it today to be, which is really, really hot and no particular surface, okay, powered by a nuclear reaction at the center. So how do you know that there's not beings that can live on the surface of the sun that are naturally adapted to live in 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit? And that's just how they live, okay? We don't know that. It's possible. Okay, we'll get into this in the next class. All right, we'll talk about the idea of why is it that we need to focus on things that we have some idea of how they could exist. And I'll give you a hint. How do you not know there's not a ghost standing next to me right here? A ghost and an angel standing right here. Okay, could be, right? Okay, we'll get to that more in the next class. Okay, so a couple people ask questions like the idea, like, well, when did the average person start really thinking about space aliens? And the average person, I would say, has always tended to believe in things that are not human, that are, that interact with people. For example, elves and ghosts and goblins and trolls and all these magical type of critters. Now, that's so, and people's belief in those kind of things tend to bleed over into space aliens. Okay, in many ways, space aliens fill the same role as belief in fairies might have filled 200 years ago. So when does the idea really start catching on of like aliens in the way we think of it today? And I would say that the whole Mars business was a big part of that. Okay, so when Percival Lowell was talking about how he could see canals on Mars, then that idea was getting onto the newspapers, as we've seen, and people, in particular H.G. Wells, who wrote War of the Worlds, he probably is a person I would point to as really bringing in the idea of space aliens, especially the idea of space aliens as bad guys. Okay, those guys, they're not going to be a big threat. Okay, in the little huts and stuff, they're not going to be coming and invading Earth and taking over. And neither, for that matter, are these guys, right? They don't even know how to make clothes. Okay, so the thought is not that those guys are particularly scary, but Wells changes this picture. Now, I'll pause this for a minute and then start it up again.